Chapter 1. The Social Blueprint. Think back to a time when you stood at the edge of a crowded room. Perhaps it was a corporate mixer, a sprawling wedding reception, or a neighborhood gathering. You were holding a drink you barely wanted, your jaw aching slightly from maintaining a polite, frozen smile, and a persistent quiet voice in your head was counting down the minutes until you could reasonably make your exit. You looked around at the people laughing effortlessly, weaving through the crowd with magnetic ease, and you wondered what invisible language they were speaking. You wondered why you were missing the vocabulary. For a very long time, society has sold us a pervasive myth. We are told that social grace, charisma, and the ability to effortlessly connect with others are innate talents. You either have it or you do not. You are either the life of the party, naturally gifted with the gab, or you are destined to hug the walls in quiet discomfort. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of human behavior. Connection is not a genetic lottery, it is a science. It is a sequence of learnable, repeatable patterns. Just as you might study the grammar of a foreign language or the elegant logic of mathematics, you can study the hidden rules of human interaction. You can master the social game, not by changing who you are, but by deeply understanding how you and the people around you actually function. The first and most critical step in this journey is dismantling the terrible advice we have all been given at some point, to simply fake it until you make it. Imagine a naturally gifted marathon runner deciding that, to be a true athlete, they must become a world-class weightlifter. They put on the heavy gear, step into a gym, and attempt to lift 3 times their body weight. They will struggle, they will exhaust themselves, and they will likely get hurt. Trying to force yourself into a bubbly, aggressively extroverted persona when you are naturally contemplative or reserved is precisely the same thing. You are putting on emotional weightlifting gear when you were built for a different kind of race. Worse than the exhaustion is the fact that faking it simply does not work. Human beings are biological lie detectors. Our brains are hardwired to pick up on the most microscopic discrepancies in facial expressions, vocal tone, and body language. When you force a smile, the muscles around your eyes do not fully engage. When you feign enthusiasm, your voice lacks the rich, resonant timbre of genuine excitement. The people around you might not consciously realize why, but their brains will register a sense of dissonance. They will feel a subtle, inexplicable distance. Furthermore, emotions are highly contagious. When you drag yourself to an event you actively dread, carrying a heavy aura of obligation and discomfort, that energy radiates outward. You cannot build a memorable magnetic presence on a foundation of misery. To truly captivate others, you must first take absolute control of where and how you interact. You must design your own social blueprint. This begins by abandoning the idea that you must say yes to every invitation, every coffee date, and every networking mixer. Instead, you must become fiercely protective of your energy and strategic about your environment. Think about the locations and scenarios in your life as falling into 3 distinct categories. First, there are your places of survival. These are the environments that drain you, where the lighting feels harsh, the noise feels overwhelming, and the conversations feel incredibly forced. For some, this is a loud, thumping nightclub. For others, it is a rigid, formal boardroom or a sprawling conference hall filled with strangers. When you step into a survival location, your internal battery immediately begins to deplete. Your goal is simply to make it through, which leaves you with zero surplus energy to be engaging, witty, or deeply present. You must give yourself permission to unapologetically decline invitations to these spaces whenever possible. Next, there are neutral spaces. These are the environments where your energy remains relatively stable. Depending on your mood or the specific company, you can have a perfectly pleasant time, though you might not feel entirely electrified. A casual dinner party, a familiar coffee shop, or a routine office meeting might fall into this category. These are the spaces where you can comfortably deploy the skills you will learn, pacing yourself and navigating the interactions with quiet confidence. Finally, there are the environments where you truly thrive. These are the spaces where your shoulders drop, your breathing deepens, and you feel entirely like yourself. Perhaps it is a quiet, intimate booth at a softly lit restaurant. Perhaps it is a walking trail where you can have deep, one-on-one conversations surrounded by nature. Or perhaps you are someone who thrives in the high-energy pulse of a massive house party. Wherever it is, this is your social sweet spot. When you are in a thriving environment, your genuine joy and comfort become your greatest assets. Your authentic enthusiasm becomes a magnet, drawing people toward you because you are emitting a frequency of total comfort. By fiercely prioritizing your Thrive locations, you set yourself up to win before you even speak a single word. Once you have mastered the macro level of choosing your environments, you must master the micro level of navigating the physical space within them. Every room has a hidden geography, a map of psychological zones that dictate the flow of human connection. Understanding this map allows you to bypass the awkwardness and position yourself exactly where the best interactions naturally occur. Imagine walking through the doors of a busy professional gathering. The immediate area just inside the entrance is what we can call the starting block. Emotionally, this is the most volatile zone in the room. When people first cross the threshold, their anxiety is at its peak. Their minds are cluttered with a dozen frantic thoughts, checking their coat, silencing their phone, wondering if they are underdressed, scanning the crowd for a familiar face and bracing themselves for the evening. The gravest mistake you can make is trying to initiate a deep conversation in this zone. If you approach someone who is still shedding their coat and their nerves, you are catching them at a confidence low. They will be distracted, their eyes will dart over your shoulder, searching for a lifeline, and the interaction will fall flat. Allow people to transition through the starting block undisturbed. As you move deeper into the room, you will encounter the trap zones. These are the areas where connection goes to die. The most common trap is the food station. It seems like a logical place to gather. After all, everyone loves to eat. But think about the logistics. People are trying to balance plates, hold napkins, and chew. It is physically awkward to shake hands, and attempting to have a fluid, engaging conversation while someone is mid-bite of a samosa or a sandwich is inherently clumsy. People hover around the food because it gives their hands something to do, not because they are open to meaningful dialogue. Another trap is the bathroom corridor, where people are focused on a singular mission and possess zero desire to linger. And perhaps the most seductive trap of all is the huddle of familiar faces. The moment you latch onto the two colleagues you already know, you create an invisible fortress. You signal to the rest of the room that your social circle is closed. Where then should you position yourself? You must seek out the social sweet spots. The absolute best piece of real estate in any room is the area right where people exit the beverage station. By the time someone has navigated the starting block, dropped off their coat and secured a drink, their initial anxiety has crested and broken. They take that first sip, turn around to face the room, and suddenly they are ready to mingle. If you are standing in this gentle transition area, you become an immediate, welcoming presence. You offer salvation from the awkwardness of standing alone with a fresh drink. A simple, warm observation about the event or the beverage is all it takes to spark a phenomenal conversation. Another powerful sweet spot is in the gentle orbit of the host. The host is the central hub of the event's social wheel. By spending a few moments thanking the host and asking them for a brief introduction to someone interesting, you leverage their social capital. You instantly borrow their credibility, making it infinitely easier to establish trust with someone new. But navigating this social terrain does not mean you have to be a solitary explorer. The most charismatic individuals understand the profound power of alliance. You can dramatically accelerate your social growth by identifying your team. Think about the people in your life who genuinely bring out your best, the ones who make you laugh freely, and who share your desire for personal evolution. Identify one person to be your trusted social partner, someone who can attend neutral or challenging events with you. When you have a partner in crime, the stakes instantly lower. You can quietly practice your skills, debrief in the corner, and support each other's efforts to break out of old, stagnant routines. Equally important is identifying the people you deeply want to elevate in your life. Look around your landscape and find the individual you respect immensely, perhaps a mentor, a fascinating colleague, or an acquaintance whose mind you admire. Keep this specific person in your thoughts as you learn the mechanics of connection. They are the benchmark for your growth, the relationship you will consciously and intentionally deepen using the tools you are about to acquire. You do not have to be best friends with everyone you meet. You do not have to perform a song and dance to be worthy of attention. You simply have to know where you shine, where the room flows, and who you want to bring with you on the journey. When you dictate the terms of your social engagement, you replace fear with strategy. You replace awkwardness with quiet, deliberate power. The game is no longer rigged against you because you have finally learned how to draw the board. Chapter 2. The Art of the First Impression. Imagine walking into a sprawling winter wedding reception in Delhi, the air thick with the scent of marigolds and roasted spices, the hall echoing with loud music and joyous overlapping conversations. You know absolutely no one except the host, who is nowhere to be found. As you cross the threshold, hundreds of eyes briefly dart in your direction. In that precise fraction of a second, long before you have offered a warm greeting or even cleared your throat, a silent, invisible verdict has been passed. People have already decided whether they want to approach you, whether they trust you, and whether they find you compelling. We like to believe that we are highly rational creatures who evaluate others based on the merit of their character, the brilliance of their ideas, and the eloquence of their speech. But human biology is far more ancient and far more pragmatic. Our brains are beautifully calibrated survival machines. Evolution has hardwired us to make lightning-fast snap judgments because, for our ancient ancestors, a slow judgment could mean the difference between life and death. When a stranger approached the tribe, our ancestors did not have the luxury of sitting down for a cup of chai to discuss their intentions. They had to instantly assess the situation. Today, we are no longer scanning the horizon for physical predators, but our brains are still running that exact same prehistoric software. Whenever you meet someone new, whether it is a potential client in a sleek glass-walled boardroom in Bengaluru or a stranger at a neighborhood gathering, their brain is desperately trying to answer 3 rapid-fire questions about you. The first question is a matter of basic safety. Are you a friend or a foe? The second question assesses your capability. Are you a winner or a loser? And the final question determines your loyalty. Are you an ally or an enemy? If you can subconsciously answer these 3 questions positively in the first few seconds, you bypass their psychological alarm systems. You instantly elevate the interaction from wary observation to genuine, magnetic trust. You become what performers call a triple threat, utilizing your hands, your posture, and your eyes to communicate absolute safety and confidence before you ever utter a word. To answer the first question, whether you are a friend or a foe, you must understand the profound psychological importance of your hands. When a prehistoric human encountered a stranger, the very first place they looked was the stranger's hands. They needed to see if the person was carrying a rock, a spear, or a club. If the hands were empty and visible, the immediate threat level plummeted. Even though we are navigating modern corporate parks and social mixers rather than the wild savannah, this instinct remains deeply embedded in our neurobiology. When someone cannot see your hands, a primitive alarm bell rings in their subconscious. They feel a subtle, inexplicable sense of unease. This is why burying your hands in your pockets is an absolute killer of rapport. It feels comfortable, casual, and perhaps even a bit stylish to casually hook your thumbs into your trousers. But to the brain of the person you are speaking with, it is a glaring warning sign. You are hiding your intentions. The absolute easiest and most transformative adjustment you can make to your first impression is to simply keep your hands visible. If you are sitting across from a colleague at a cafe, keep your hands above the table, never hidden in your lap. Let your hands breathe. Let them be seen. This visibility culminates in the ultimate gesture of physical trust, the handshake. When you extend your hand and make skin-to-skin contact with another human being, an extraordinary chemical reaction occurs. Your brain, and the brain of the person you are touching, releases a rush of oxytocin. This is the biological foundation of human connection, a hormone that chemically facilitates trust and bonding. A brilliant handshake must be dry, vertical, and perfectly firm. If your palms tend to sweat from nervous energy, wrap a tissue or a cold beverage napkin around your glass and hold it in your dominant hand, allowing it to secretly absorb the moisture before you reach out to greet someone. Keep your thumb pointing straight toward the ceiling, avoiding the domineering palm-down approach or the submissive palm-up offering. Match the firmness of the other person's grip, squeezing just until you feel the subtle resistance of their muscles, and then release. In that single touch, you have chemically proven that you are a friend. Once their brain registers that you are safe, it immediately moves to the second question. Are you a winner or a loser? Humans are innately drawn to capable, confident leaders. We want to associate with people who are poised for success. But confidence is not something you merely feel. It is something you physically broadcast. When an athlete crosses a finish line victorious, regardless of their culture or background, their body naturally expands. They throw their arms up, their chest pushes forward, and their chin tilts upward. They take up as much space as the universe will allow. Conversely, when an athlete suffers a crushing defeat, their body collapses inward, their shoulders slump, their head bows, and they cross their arms, taking up as little space as physically possible. You do not need to run into a client meeting with your arms raised in triumph, but you must adopt a slightly moderated version of this victorious expansion. Roll your shoulders back and down, allowing your chest to open. Keep your chin perfectly parallel to the floor. Create a small amount of breathing room between your arms and your torso, resisting the urge to pin your elbows nervously against your ribs. This expansive posture signals to the world that you are profoundly comfortable in your own skin. Sadly, modern technology constantly tricks us into broadcasting defeat. Think about what you do when you are sitting in a doctor's waiting room or lingering in the lobby before a job interview. You pull out your smartphone. You bow your head, round your shoulders, pull your elbows tightly into your sides, and shrink into a tiny curled ball. Without realizing it, you are holding the exact physiological posture of a defeated athlete. When the person you are waiting to meet finally walks through the door, their very first glimpse of you is a portrait of low confidence. Break this habit entirely. If you must look at your phone, bring the device up to your eye level rather than dropping your head to your chest. Maintain your expansive space. Stand like a winner and the world will assume you are one. The final question a new acquaintance silently asks is perhaps the most deeply human of all. Are you an ally? It is not enough to be non-threatening. It is not enough to be confident. People want to know if you actually care about them. They want to know if they are seen. We have all endured interactions with incredibly confident, successful people who spend the entire conversation scanning the room over our shoulders, looking for someone more important to talk to. Despite their success, we leave the interaction feeling entirely dismissed. The ultimate weapon of alliance is sustained, deeply present eye contact. When you look someone in the eyes, you are telling them that in this specific moment, out of all the chaotic distractions in the world, they are the sole focus of your universe. It satisfies our deepest childhood cravings for attention and validation. Think of a young child pulling desperately at their parent's sleeve, just wanting the parent to look at a drawing or a passing car. They do not just want the parent to hear them, they want the parent to share the visual experience. As adults, we are no different. We want to share the emotional space of an interaction. Maintaining eye contact for about 2/3 of your conversation is the sweet spot of connection. It is enough to build deep, unwavering trust without becoming an intense, unblinking stare. Notice the color of the other person's eyes. Allow your gaze to soften. When you combine visible hands that signal safety, an expansive posture that radiates capability, and unwavering eye contact that promises alliance, you strip away all the friction of a new encounter. You are no longer just another face in a crowded room. You are a profoundly safe, magnetic presence. You have mastered the silent language of the first impression, paving a golden road for the words that are about to follow. Chapter 3. Igniting Conversations and Lasting Memorability. Picture a crowded, chaotic spice market in the heart of Old Delhi. A local guide leads a small group of weary travelers through the labyrinth of narrow, sun-dappled alleys, dodging hand-pulled carts and the intoxicating plumes of roasted cumin and dried chilies. Most guides would simply march to the front of the pack, recite the century the market was built, list the prices of the goods on display, and herd the group to the next stop. But this particular guide does something entirely different. He watches the faces of the people following him. He notices a woman who lingers near the saffron stalls, inhaling deeply with a look of pure nostalgia. He immediately walks over and begins to tell her a story about how families have passed down the secrets of harvesting those delicate red threads for generations, asking her what memories the scent evokes for her. A few moments later, he catches a young architect staring intently at the intricate, decaying wooden carvings on a merchant's door above the shops. The guide instantly shifts the narrative, diving into the forgotten craftsmanship of the era and asking the architect about his own design philosophies. This man does not just give a rote, memorized tour. He actively hunts for the specific topics that make each person's eyes light up. He is searching for conversational sparks. Contrast this vibrant, deeply engaging experience with the reality of our daily interactions. For most of our lives, we are trapped in a mundane, looping script of small talk. Think about your last networking event or neighborhood dinner. The dialogue is almost painfully predictable. What do you do for a living? How is the weather treating you? Did you get caught in the traffic on the ring road? This kind of interaction is the conversational equivalent of a slow, creaky carousel ride. It is entirely safe, it is perfectly polite, and it is absolutely forgettable. We rely on these predictable scripts because they are easy. They require 0 emotional calories and no vulnerability. But here is the hard truth of human connection. No one remembers a carousel ride. We remember the roller coaster. We remember the conversations that have sudden, thrilling drops, exhilarating climbs, and unexpected twists. We crave the kind of dialogue that leaves us breathless and energized. The reason we crave this kind of dynamic interaction comes down to a powerful little neurotransmitter called dopamine. Whenever we experience something novel, unexpected, or deeply pleasurable, our brain releases a flood of this chemical. Dopamine is the biological equivalent of a bright, fluorescent mental sticky note that screams to your brain, "Pay attention to this, it is important." When you ask a fresh, unexpected question, you are literally giving the other person's mind a chemical reward. Instead of asking a new acquaintance the tired question of how their workday was, imagine looking them in the eye and asking, "What was the absolute highlight of your day?" Or, "Are you working on any personal passion projects that are keeping you up at night?" The moment you shatter the expected social script, the other person's brain wakes up. They sit a little straighter. They smile a little wider. You have just bypassed the small talk and ignited a spark. Once you have thrown out a spark, your next task is to look for the hot buttons. A hot button is a specific topic, a beloved hobby, or a deeply held philosophy that completely electrifies the person you are speaking with. You know you have struck gold when you see a physical shift in their demeanor. Their voice will naturally speed up, they will physically lean in closer to you, and their eyebrows will raise in genuine, uncontainable enthusiasm. Your job in any conversation is to be a joyful detective, gently tossing out different unique topics until you witness that beautiful physical shift. And when you finally find their hot button, you do not simply acknowledge it with a polite nod and move on to the next subject. You dig. You ask for the story behind the passion. You ask them why it matters to them. You invite them to share their joy with you. But igniting the conversation and finding these hot buttons is only half of the equation. What do you do once the other person is talking animatedly? This brings us to a profound, often uncomfortable realization about human nature. We all harbor a desperate, quiet yearning to be truly heard, yet most of us are terrible listeners. Think about a time you realized you were operating as an interrupter. Perhaps you were sitting at a cafe with a dear friend, and as they were pouring their heart out about a struggle at work, you were not truly listening to comprehend their pain. Instead, you were mentally reloading your own ammunition, waiting for them to take a single breath so you could launch into your own perfectly crafted story about a time you faced a similar issue. It is an exhausting, inauthentic way to navigate relationships, reducing conversations to competing monologues rather than collaborative symphonies. Imagine a high-level executive who, upon realizing she had this exact habit, decided to run a radical personal experiment. For one entire week of high-stakes corporate meetings and evening social mixes, she resolved to speak only to ask clarifying questions. She took a vow of conversational silence regarding her own opinions, her own anecdotes, and her own advice. What she discovered at the end of that week was staggering. By simply listening deeply and focusing her entire intellect on the person speaking, she built stronger alliances in 5 days than she had in the previous 5 years. People left her office feeling brilliant, validated, and deeply connected to her, all because she offered them the rarest and most precious commodity in the modern, distracted world: her undivided, unselfish attention. This kind of deep, intentional listening allows you to become a conversational highlighter. Just as you might use a bright yellow marker to emphasize the most important, beautiful passages in a beloved book so you can return to them later, you can choose to highlight the absolute best qualities in the people you meet. There is a fascinating, heavily researched psychological phenomenon which proves that people will inevitably rise or fall to the level of your expectations. If you consistently treat a colleague as if they are clumsy and forgetful, they will internalize that narrative and inevitably drop the ball. But if you treat that same person as if they are a vital, brilliant, and indispensable part of the team, they will stretch themselves, sometimes beyond their own perceived limits, to meet that positive label. When you listen to someone, you must actively hunt for the good in them. When they casually share a small victory, do not just offer a polite congratulation, celebrate it with them as if it were your own triumph. Look them in the eye and tell them you are genuinely amazed by their dedication. Tell them they have an incredible eye for detail, or a contagious laugh, or a brilliantly analytical mind. By giving someone a positive label, you are not flattering them, you are inviting them to step into the highest, most capable version of themselves. You are telling them that you see their greatness even if they sometimes forget it themselves. This highlighting effect must also extend to how you introduce the people in your life to one another. Never settle for the lazy, generic introduction. Mumbling, "Meet my friend Ravi, Ravi, meet Priya," is a tragic waste of a social opportunity. Instead, use your introductions to passionately advocate for the people you care about. Imagine the shift in energy when you say, "Priya, I am so thrilled to introduce you to Ravi. He is one of the most brilliant software architects I have ever met, and he just successfully orchestrated a massive product launch that blew everyone away. Ravi, Priya is an incredibly talented designer who possesses the best aesthetic eye in the city and always knows exactly which hidden cafes have the best coffee." In 10 brief seconds, you have given both individuals a psychological gold star. You have provided them with immediate, rich conversational sparks to explore, and you have firmly positioned yourself as the generous, warm-hearted connector who brings out the absolute best in everyone. Being the most memorable person in the room is never about dominating the conversation. It is not about having the cleverest punchline, the sharpest wardrobe, or the most intimidating resume. True magnetism is about making the people around you feel endlessly fascinating. When you possess the courage to abandon the dull safety of small talk, when you actively hunt for the sparks that light people up, and when you generously highlight their absolute best qualities, you become entirely unforgettable. You leave people feeling significantly better, smarter, and more vibrant than you found them, and that is the only kind of first impression that truly lasts a lifetime. Chapter 4. The Magnetism of Similarity. Think about the sheer physical relief of dropping your guard. Imagine you have recently relocated to a sprawling, fast-paced metropolis like Mumbai for a demanding new role. For weeks, you have been navigating a sea of unfamiliar faces, adjusting to the relentless rhythm of the local trains, and trying to decipher the unspoken corporate culture of your new office. You attend an industry mixer feeling entirely out of your depth, clutching a glass of sparkling water and making polite, stiff conversation. Someone mentions how much they love the chaotic energy of the city's street food markets. Wanting to be honest, you casually mention that you actually find the crowds overwhelming and prefer the quiet predictability of your hometown. A few moments later, another person jokes about their obsession with a popular reality television show. You chuckle and softly reply that you never quite understood the appeal and prefer reading historical biographies. Without realizing it, you are systematically building an invisible fortress around yourself. You are falling into the trap of the "not me" response. In our attempt to be authentic and state our unique preferences, we often accidentally hold up conversational stop signs. When we highlight our differences, the brain of the person we are speaking with subtly registers a disconnect. It signals that we are not part of their tribe. It creates a quiet, lingering friction. But then, the conversation shifts. A woman standing near you sighs and mentions a highly specific, slightly obscure retro Bollywood playback singer she grew up listening to on old cassette tapes during long monsoon afternoons. You freeze, your eyes widen, you turn to her and say, "You listen to them too? I thought I was the only one." In that fraction of a second, the entire dynamic of the room changes. The invisible walls collapse. You are no longer two weary professionals making forced small talk. You are kin. Your shoulders drop, your genuine smile breaks through, and a profound sense of psychological safety washes over you. This is the staggering power of the similarity attraction effect. We are biologically hardwired to seek out people who mirror us. When someone shares our quirks, our passions, or our obscure tastes, it validates our own existence. It whispers to our primal brain that we are safe, that we are understood, and that we are not navigating this complex world entirely alone. To become ridiculously, effortlessly likable, you must transform yourself into a relentless seeker of the Me Too moment. You must abandon the instinct to point out where you differ, and instead train your mind to actively hunt for common ground. Imagine that every single person you meet is walking around holding a massive, tangled ball of yarn in their hands. This tangled ball represents the chaotic jumble of their thoughts, their background, their passions, their anxieties, and their experiences. When you first approach someone, their ball of yarn is tightly knotted. Your objective in a conversation is to gently tease out a single thread from their hands and see if it matches a thread in your own life. You can search for these threads in 3 primary areas. You can look for shared context, simply pointing out the shared reality of the event, the venue, or the neighborhood you are both currently inhabiting. You can search for shared people, discovering mutual acquaintances, colleagues, or alumni networks. But the most powerful threads of all are shared interests. When you discover a mutual passion, whether it is a love for vintage motorcycles, a dedication to a specific fitness routine, or an obsession with perfectly brewed South Indian filter coffee, you strike gold. You have found a matching thread. However, simply finding the thread is not enough. If you exclaim, "Me too," and then immediately drop the subject to talk about the weather, the connection stalls. The thread goes slack. Once you find a similarity, you must gently and intentionally pull the thread. You do this by asking one of the most powerful words in the human language, why. Imagine 2 fathers waiting outside a school gate in Chennai on a humid afternoon. They strike up a conversation, and one mentions that he spends his entire Sunday morning cultivating a terrace garden. The other father smiles and says, "Me too, I just started growing my own vegetables." This is a beautiful shared thread, but if the conversation ends there, it remains entirely surface level. To pull the thread, the second father must lean in and ask, "Why did you decide to start a terrace garden?" The first father might pause, looking thoughtful, before explaining that his job as a financial analyst is so abstract, so entirely confined to spreadsheets and digital screens, that he felt a desperate need to put his hands in the dirt and watch something physically grow. The second father, a software developer, resonates profoundly with that exact sentiment. He feels the same digital fatigue. Suddenly, these 2 men are no longer just exchanging gardening tips about tomatoes and coriander. They are having a deeply vulnerable conversation about the human need for groundedness in a modern, disconnected world. By simply asking why, they bypassed small talk entirely and forged a bond rooted in shared philosophy. You can cement this bond permanently by taking the final step, tying your threads together. A tie is created when you can offer genuine, unselfish help based on your shared interest. If the first father casually mentions that his plants are struggling with a specific type of pest, and the second father promises to bring him a bottle of homemade neem oil spray the next day, an impermeable connection is forged. When you take someone else's problem and treat it as your own, you graduate from a pleasant acquaintance to a fiercely valued ally. But what happens when you meet someone whose life experience is so entirely foreign to yours that you simply cannot find a matching thread? What if they are an expert in a field you know absolutely nothing about, or they practice a hobby you have never even heard of? When you cannot say, "Me too," you deploy an equally powerful phrase, "Teach me." If someone mentions they spend their weekends restoring antique clocks and you have never held a wrench in your life, do not let the thread drop. Lean in, let your curiosity blaze and say, "That is fascinating. I know absolutely nothing about clockmaking. What is it about restoring them that captivates you?" When you ask someone to teach you, you offer them a stage. You validate their expertise and honor their passion. You create a thread of eager student and passionate teacher, which is just as magnetic as a shared hobby. The most captivating individuals in any room are not the ones who perform the loudest or boast the most impressive accolades. They are the ones who make every single person they speak to feel like a kindred spirit. They weave a beautiful, invisible web of shared humanity, choosing to find the bridges between us rather than pointing out the walls. When you master the art of the thread, you will never run out of things to say, and you will never again have to stand at the edge of a room wondering how to belong. You will simply reach out, find a thread, and pull. Chapter 5. Unmasking Hidden Emotions. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet, dimly lit cafe in Hyderabad, watching the heavy monsoon rain lash against the window panes. Across the table sits your business partner of 5 years. You have just slid a highly lucrative term sheet across the table, a buyout offer that represents the culmination of your shared blood, sweat, and tears. Your partner picks up the document, smiles broadly, and says, "This is fantastic. It is exactly what we have been working toward. I am completely on board." The words are perfect. The tone is steady. But in the fraction of a second before that smile formed, you saw something else entirely. For the briefest of moments, his inner eyebrows pinched together, his upper eyelids drooped, and the corners of his mouth pulled downward. If you were only listening to the words, you would have ordered a coffee to celebrate. But because you saw that fleeting shadow cross his face, you realize a profound truth. Your partner is heartbroken. Perhaps he is mourning the loss of the company's independence, or perhaps he fears losing his sense of purpose. Whatever the reason, his words are telling you a convenient lie, while his face is screaming the absolute truth. For our entire lives, we are taught to communicate through words. We painstakingly draft emails, we rehearse pitches, and we carefully curate our sentences to project confidence and agreement. But human beings possess a secondary, entirely involuntary language that broadcasts our deepest emotional states before our conscious mind can even censor them. Researchers have found that congenitally blind babies make the exact same facial expressions as sighted babies, despite having never seen a face. This proves that our facial expressions are not a learned cultural behavior, they are a deeply embedded biological reflex. When we experience an intense emotion, our facial muscles react automatically, often in less than a second, creating what is known as a micro-expression. These involuntary flashes happen so quickly that they are virtually impossible to consciously control or suppress. Across all cultures and geographies, human beings display 7 universal micro-expressions. Learning to spot these 7 fleeting shadows is like gaining the ability to read the invisible ink hidden beneath every conversation. It is the ultimate tool for profound empathy and truth-seeking. To decode the people in your life, you must first understand the anatomy of these 7 universal emotions. Let us begin with the most devious and destructive emotion of all: contempt. Contempt is uniquely asymmetrical, characterized by a one-sided mouth raise or a smirk. It is the physical manifestation of scorn, disdain, and feeling superior to the person you are interacting with. Because it looks like a half smile, people often mistake it for amusement. But contempt is a glaring red flag. If you are proposing a new workflow to a colleague and they flash a smirk, they do not just disagree with your idea, they secretly disrespect it. If left unaddressed, contempt festers and decays relationships from the inside out. Next, consider the sharp defensive flash of anger. Anger shows up as lowered eyebrows pinched together, creating 2 vertical creases alongside tightened, narrowed lips. You will often see this when you deliver unexpected bad news or when a client feels financially threatened during a negotiation. When you spot anger, your instinct might be to defensive or to rush through your presentation to escape the tension. Do the exact opposite. Anger simply means the other person feels an obstacle has been placed in their path. Pause. Calmly explain your perspective and offer them the floor to express their frustrations safely. Fear and surprise are often confused, but their physical signatures and emotional meanings are entirely distinct. Fear is a primitive survival response marked by widened eyes, elevated eyebrows with horizontal lines across the forehead, and a slightly opened mouth. This expression is designed to widen our field of vision to spot physical or psychological threats. If you give a loved one an expensive, complicated technological gadget as a gift, and they flash fear before saying thank you, they are not ungrateful. They are deeply intimidated by the prospect of having to learn how to use it. Your job is to soothe that fear by offering gentle, patient guidance. Surprise, on the other hand, is the longest of the micro-expressions, shown by raised, rounded eyebrows and a dropped jaw as the person takes a sudden intake of breath. Surprise simply means the brain is trying to rapidly process unexpected information. It is the ultimate truth-telling emotion. If you suspect a friend is planning a secret celebration for you and you casually mention the date, A flash of genuine surprise confirms they had no idea, whereas a flash of fear indicates you just ruined their secret. Disgust is perhaps the most visceral expression, involving the wrinkling of the upper nose and the lifting of the upper lip. It is the exact face a child makes when tasting bitter medicine. In social situations, people flash disgust when they are trying to politely mask their profound distaste for an idea, a proposal, or an environment. If you notice a candidate flash disgust when you mention that a job role involves heavy administrative paperwork, you must pause and give them permission to express their true feelings, or you will end up hiring someone who will inevitably resent their daily tasks. Finally, we arrive at the two most profound indicators of human connection: sadness and happiness. Sadness is incredibly difficult to fake. It reveals itself through drooping eyelids and the inner corners of the eyebrows pinching together, often accompanied by a slight pulling down of the lip corners. It is the heavy precursor to tears. When you see sadness, the only appropriate response is deep, unconditional empathy. Conversely, happiness is the emotion we fake most frequently. We smile to be polite, we smile for photographs, and we smile to cover our exhaustion. But genuine happiness engages the upper cheek muscles and creates distinct wrinkles around the sides of the eyes. When you see those beautiful crow's feet, you know you have sparked authentic joy. Savor it, celebrate it, and let that shared joy act as an anchor for your relationship. The true mastery of unmasking hidden emotions lies in observing congruency. You must constantly ask yourself if a person's stated emotions match their visible emotions. When you notice an incongruence, when the words say yes, but the face flashes fear, disgust, or sadness, you are witnessing a profound internal conflict. The greatest mistake you can make in these moments is to play the interrogator. You do not point a finger and accuse them of lying. Instead, you use the discrepancy as an invitation to offer grace. You gently pause the conversation, lower your voice, and say, "You mentioned you are comfortable with this, but I want to make absolutely sure we are aligned. Is there any small part of this that feels overwhelming?" You create a psychological sanctuary where their hidden truth is allowed to step into the light. If you ever find yourself struggling to decipher a fleeting expression on someone's face, you can rely on a fascinating phenomenon called the facial feedback hypothesis. It suggests that our facial expressions and emotions are connected in a biological loop. If you see an expression you cannot quite place, try subtly mimicking it yourself. By physically adopting the expression, your brain will often trigger the corresponding emotion in your own body, allowing you to literally feel what the other person is experiencing. This is the ultimate, profound realization of this science. Decoding faces is not a parlor trick or a tool for manipulation. It is the deepest form of human empathy. It is the quiet, powerful commitment to seeing people not just as they wish to be seen, but exactly as they are. Chapter 6. Decoding the Human Matrix. Imagine a brilliant operations director named Ananya taking over a failing, chaotic logistics hub in the industrial outskirts of Pune. On paper, Ananya had all the answers. She brought in state-of-the-art routing software, reorganized the warehouse flow, and implemented rigorous efficiency metrics. Yet 3 months into her tenure, productivity continued to plummet, and team morale was at an absolute breaking point. Frustrated, she sat in her office late one evening, staring at the flawless spreadsheets that failed to translate into reality. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Spreadsheets do not load cargo, drive trucks, or soothe angry vendors. People do, and she was treating her people like identical, interchangeable cogs in a machine. Ananya decided to stop looking at her operational metrics and start looking at the human beings running them. She realized that trying to force a naturally cautious, detail-oriented employee to handle rapid-fire, unpredictable vendor negotiations was paralyzing him. Conversely, locking her most highly sociable, energetic dispatcher in a quiet back office to audit spreadsheets was draining his spirit. She began to completely reorganize her teams, not based on their resumes, but based on their inherent psychological traits. She matched the meticulous analysts to quality control and unleashed the highly outgoing problem solvers onto the floor to motivate the loading crews. Within weeks, the hub transformed from a failing enterprise into a vibrant, synchronized operation. Ananya succeeded because she stopped trying to force people into rigid boxes and instead learned to decode the complex, invisible matrix of human personality. We often find people intimidating, unpredictable, or simply baffling because we lack a framework for understanding how they operate. But psychological research has provided us with a profound master key known as the 5-factor model. This principle suggests that every single human being possesses 5 basic personality traits, and each of us falls somewhere along a distinct spectrum for every trait. You can remember these 5 traits using the simple acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. By learning to read this matrix, you transition from reacting to people with frustration to deeply understanding their core motivations. The first dimension of this human landscape is openness, which dictates how a person approaches new ideas and experiences. Someone who is highly open is driven by a deep, insatiable curiosity. They are the dreamers and the adventurers, the people who constantly want to try the newest fusion restaurant, explore uncharted neighborhoods, and challenge conventional wisdom. On the opposite end of the spectrum, someone with low openness finds profound comfort in routine and tradition. They are pragmatic and grounded, finding joy in returning to the same beloved holiday resort in Kerala year after year and savoring the stability of a well-worn habit. When a highly open spouse craves a spontaneous backpacking trip and a low-open spouse desperately wants to book their usual predictable cruise, it is not a battle of love, it is simply a clash of openness. Next, we must look at conscientiousness, which reveals how a person approaches getting things done. A highly conscientious individual relies on structure. They are the architects of meticulous to-do lists, the guardians of perfectly color-coded calendars, and the owners of pristine, deeply organized workspaces. They find peace in precision. A person with low conscientiousness, however, feels entirely suffocated by rigid schedules. They thrive in the realm of big ideas, flexibility, and creative chaos. They are the visionaries who might have a desk buried in unread mail and coffee cups, yet can spontaneously engineer a brilliant corporate strategy. Extroversion is the third pillar, and it is perhaps the most misunderstood. It is not fundamentally about shyness or volume. It is about how a person approaches and processes social energy. A high extrovert is biologically energized by the presence of others. They draw power from loud rooms, group brainstorming sessions, and constant interaction. A low extrovert or an introvert finds these same environments incredibly draining. They crave solitude not because they dislike people, but because quiet, solitary environments are required to recharge their internal batteries. They deeply value rich, one-on-one conversations over the loud clamor of a crowded party. The fourth trait is agreeableness, which defines how we approach cooperation and teamwork. A highly agreeable person is the ultimate empathetic peacemaker. They naturally default to saying yes, deeply valuing harmony and the emotional well-being of the group over their own personal preferences. Someone with low agreeableness is far more skeptical, analytical, and practical. They default to saying no, prioritizing hard facts and correct answers over protecting someone's feelings. While it is easy to view low agreeableness as a negative trait, these individuals are absolutely essential. They are the brave truth-tellers who will protect a company from a terrible, harmonious consensus by daring to point out the flaws in the plan. Finally, we arrive at neuroticism, which measures how a person manages worry and emotional stability. A highly neurotic person is a chronic worrier, prone to mood swings and sensitive to their environment. But reframed, they are also the ultimate crisis preventers. Because they constantly imagine every possible worst-case scenario, they are the ones who show up with backup plans, extra batteries, and an umbrella just in case the sky turns grey. A person with low neuroticism is the calm, steady rock. They possess an unshakable faith that everything will work out in the end, maintaining emotional equilibrium even when the world around them is catching fire. To navigate your relationships, you must learn to speed-read this matrix in the people you encounter. Since we cannot hand a psychological evaluation to every new client or romantic prospect, we must become brilliant observers of behavioral evidence. Imagine you are planning a weekend trip to a nearby hill station with a group of friends. The matrix reveals itself in every action. The highly conscientious friend takes the lead, immediately drafting a minute-by-minute itinerary and a shared expense spreadsheet. The high neurotic friend texts the group to ensure everyone has packed mosquito repellent and checks the weather forecast obsessively. The highly open friend suggests taking an unmarked dirt road along the way just to see if it leads to a hidden waterfall. The highly extroverted friend spends the entire car ride enthusiastically chatting with the toll booth operators, while the highly agreeable friend cheerfully volunteers to sit in the cramped middle seat. By observing how people plan, how they decorate their physical spaces, and the language they use, you can rapidly piece together their psychological framework. The ultimate realization of this science is understanding that you cannot change people. Roughly 35 to 50% of our personality is hardwired into our genetic makeup, with the remainder heavily forged by our upbringing. Demanding that a highly introverted partner suddenly become the life of the party, or begging a highly open, chaotic artist to suddenly love corporate spreadsheets is a recipe for mutual misery. Instead of forcing change, you must choose to either optimize or compromise. When you compromise, you acknowledge the unchangeable friction between your traits and find a livable middle ground. If a highly conscientious manager realizes their brilliant new graphic designer has incredibly low conscientiousness, the manager must stop bombarding the designer with micromanaged daily milestone checklists, which only causes the designer to freeze. Instead, they compromise by focusing solely on the final deadline and the big picture vision. When you optimize, you actively step out of your own comfort zone to honor the other person's matrix. That same manager might optimize by allowing the introverted designer to skip the loud, chaotic daily team huddles, giving them the quiet sanctuary they need to actually produce masterpieces. Knowing someone's personality also grants you a profound advantage when you are trying to persuade or pitch an idea. If you are pitching a highly open client, you must lead with the revolutionary, novel aspects of your proposal, painting a vivid picture of innovation. But if you bring that exact same visionary pitch to a highly conscientious client, you will fail spectacularly. For them, you must bring the data, the flawless execution plan, and the 20-page supporting document. If you are proposing a risky new venture to a highly neurotic partner, you do not try to hype them up with blind optimism. You win their trust by methodically outlining every single safeguard, backup plan, and safety net you have built into the system. Decoding the human matrix is never about trapping people in psychological boxes. It is about setting them free. When we truly understand the unseen forces that drive the people around us, we stop taking their differences as personal insults. We learn to speak their native psychological language. We create environments where their natural strengths can ignite, and in doing so, we bring out the absolute best in everyone we meet. Chapter 7. The Currencies of Appreciation and Value. Imagine the bustling, vibrant floor of a boutique architectural firm in Jaipur. The air is thick with the scent of drafting paper, strong coffee, and the quiet, frantic energy of a looming deadline. A junior architect has just pulled 3 consecutive all-nighters to finalize the blueprints for a massive heritage restoration project. She has poured her absolute soul into the intricacies of the design, sacrificing her weekend, her sleep, and her personal life to ensure the firm wins the bid. When the news finally arrives that the client is thrilled and the contract is secured, her manager wants to express his profound gratitude. He is a gregarious, energetic man who believes that grand victories require grand celebrations. So he orders a massive cake, gathers the entire office of 50 people in the central lobby, calls the exhausted junior architect to the front of the room, and publicly presents her with an expensive, generic gift card to a luxury retail store while everyone claps. To the manager, this is the ultimate expression of appreciation. He spent good money, he gave her public glory, and he threw a party. But as the junior architect stands there, bathed in the applause, she feels an inexplicable hollow ache. She forces a grateful smile, but internally, she is deeply, utterly depleted. Why? Because the manager spoke to her in a currency she does not value. The junior architect is a quiet, deeply introverted creative whose primary currency is quality time and sincere words of affirmation. A loud party overwhelms her. A generic gift card feels impersonal and transactional. What would have actually brought her to tears of profound gratitude was a quiet, private lunch with the senior partners, where they looked her in the eye and specifically praised the brilliant structural solutions she engineered, followed by giving her the next 2 days off to rest. The manager spent vast amounts of energy and money, yet his investment completely missed the mark. This scenario plays out every single day in our homes, our offices, and our deepest relationships. We operate under the fundamentally flawed assumption that the people around us want to be loved, valued, and rewarded in the exact same way that we do. We project our own desires onto the world. But human beings are infinitely more complex. We all trade in invisible psychological currencies. When you discover the specific currency a person deeply craves, you gain the ability to make them feel profoundly, unforgettably seen. The first layer of this invisible economy revolves around how we experience appreciation. There are 5 distinct languages through which humans express and receive gratitude, and learning to speak them fluently is the master key to human loyalty. For some individuals, the ultimate currency is words of affirmation. These people are deeply moved by spoken or written validation. A casual "good job" in a passing hallway is entirely insufficient for them. They need specificity. They save old handwritten thank you notes in their desk drawers for years, pulling them out on difficult days to remind themselves of their worth. If you are leading someone who speaks this language, a detailed email outlining exactly why their contribution was brilliant will fuel them for months. For others, the currency is quality time. They do not care about praise or presents. They care about your undivided presence. In a world characterized by relentless digital distraction, giving someone your absolute phone-free focus is the highest compliment you can offer. If a loved one speaks this language, the most romantic thing you can do is not buying them jewelry, but turning off the television, putting your phone in another room, and simply sitting with them on the balcony to share a cup of tea and a genuine conversation. Then there are those who trade in the currency of acts of service. For these individuals, talk is cheap. They feel truly valued when you actively step in to alleviate their burdens. Imagine a spouse who has been working grueling hours and comes home dreading the mountain of household chores waiting for them. If they speak the language of service, seeing that you have already cleaned the kitchen and prepared dinner will make them feel overwhelmingly loved. In a professional setting, an act of service is noticing a colleague drowning in a spreadsheet and quietly pulling up a chair to help them format the data before they even have to ask. The fourth currency is the language of gifts. This is often profoundly misunderstood as materialism, but for the true gift receiver, the financial cost of the item is entirely irrelevant. To them, a gift is a tangible, physical symbol that someone was thinking about them when they were not around. It is the thought made solid. If a colleague mentions in passing that they miss the specific type of roasted peanuts from their hometown, and you secretly source a packet and leave it on their desk the next week, you have spoken straight to their heart. You have proven that you listen. Finally, there is the language of physical touch. While we must always navigate professional environments with absolute respect for boundaries and cultural norms, appropriate physical touch remains a vital human currency. For those who speak this language, a warm, firm handshake, an enthusiastic high five after a closed deal, or a comforting pat on the upper back during a stressful moment carries more emotional weight than 1,000 words. Decoding someone's appreciation language is an exercise in careful observation. The greatest clue is hidden in how they naturally treat others. We instinctively give the type of love we most desperately wish to receive. If your best friend is constantly volunteering to help you move apartments or build your furniture, their language is acts of service. If your manager frequently drops small, beautifully wrapped pastries on people's desks, their language is gifts. Once you decode their native tongue, you must courageously switch your behavior to match theirs, even if it feels like writing with your non-dominant hand. But appreciation is only half of the equation. Beneath the ways we wish to be thanked lies a deeper, more primal layer of psychological needs. Every human interaction, from a marriage to a corporate merger, is fundamentally an exchange of resources. We are all subconsciously seeking to fulfill specific, deeply rooted internal deficits, and we are drawn to the people who can provide exactly what we lack. Some people are driven by a desperate need for status. They crave responsibility, public recognition, and the feeling of absolute importance. They want the prestigious job title, the corner office, and the opportunity to lead the vital presentation. If you understand this, you do not motivate them with a slight bump in their hourly pay. You motivate them by putting them in charge of a high-stakes initiative and letting them own the glory. Other people are driven by the currency of information. They crave mentorship, insider knowledge, and the feeling of being intellectually trusted. They want to know the strategy behind the company's decisions. You reward an information-driven person by pulling them aside, closing the door, and asking for their confidential advice on a complex problem. You make them feel like a trusted confidant. There are those whose primary resource is service and comfort. They seek environments of warmth, stability, and mutual care. They want to know that their team is a family that will protect them during difficult times. And of course, there are those who are fiercely practical, trading primarily in the currencies of money and tangible goods. For them, a promotion without a corresponding significant raise is deeply insulting because currency is their ultimate metric of value. When you combine these two profound frameworks, when you discover both the resource a person is hungering for and the specific language of appreciation they understand, you become an almost mythical presence in their life. Imagine managing an employee whose primary value is status and whose appreciation language is words of affirmation. You do not just give them a generic bonus at the end of the year, you promote them to team lead, and then you stand up at the annual company dinner and deliver a deeply specific, heartfelt speech about their brilliant leadership. You have just given them their ultimate resource in their native psychological tongue. We live in a world where everyone is desperately trying to shout their own worth into the void, hoping someone will finally notice. When you master the currencies of appreciation and value, you stop shouting. You become the rare, beautiful listener who finally provides the exact emotional sustenance the people around you have been starving for. You stop trying to change people to fit your narrative, and instead you choose the profound generosity of meeting them exactly where they are. Chapter 8. Influence and Leadership. Imagine you are sitting in a sprawling, glass-walled conference room in Gurugram, the air conditioning humming quietly against the relentless summer heat outside. At the head of the long mahogany table stands a brilliant, deeply experienced financial analyst. She has spent the last 3 months agonizing over a massive corporate merger, running the numbers late into the night and anticipating every possible market fluctuation. She possesses the exact data required to save the company millions. She clears her throat and begins her presentation, but something is wrong. Her voice is thin and strained. At the end of every sentence, her pitch sweeps upward, making her definitive statements sound like tentative questions. She reads relentlessly from a dense slide deck, overwhelming the room with a barrage of statistics and dry facts. Within 5 minutes, the senior partners are checking their phones. Within 10 minutes, they are interrupting her to debate entirely unrelated topics. Despite her absolute brilliance, she has rendered herself entirely invisible. We are taught from a very young age that if we simply work hard enough, if we gather enough facts, and if we become the undeniable experts in our field, the world will naturally stop and listen to us. But human influence does not operate on the merit of raw data. Influence is fundamentally about how that data makes people feel. You can possess the cure for a terrible disease, but if you deliver it in a way that creates doubt, boredom, or confusion, the world will walk right past you. To transition from the first 5 hours of a relationship into a deeply rooted long-term dynamic, you must master the art of speaking so that people cannot help but listen. And true influence always begins with the physical instrument of your voice. Think about the way you introduce yourself. When you state your name or your profession, do you drop your pitch at the end of the sentence, signaling absolute authority and groundedness? Or do you allow your pitch to rise, asking for subconscious permission to exist in the room? When we are nervous, our vocal cords naturally tighten, our breathing becomes shallow, and our voices creep into a higher, weaker register. We sound unsure. The people listening to us possess a primal instinct that immediately detects this lack of conviction. If you do not sound like you believe what you are saying, it is biologically impossible for anyone else to believe you. To command a room, you must physically ground your voice. Before you step into a high-stakes negotiation or a vital personal conversation, you must take a deep, expansive breath that fills your diaphragm, not just your upper chest. When you speak, you must deliberately keep your vocal tone rich and resonant, allowing your sentences to land with a definitive downward inflection. You are not asking the room for their approval. You are offering them your undeniable reality. When you speak with this kind of grounded vocal power, you trigger a sense of safety and trust in the minds of your listeners. They relax, they lean in, they subconsciously decide that you are someone worth following. But a powerful voice is merely the vessel. To truly captivate a listener, you must understand how to fill that vessel. Human beings are not calculators. We are not moved by spreadsheets, bullet points, or pie charts. We are moved by narrative. For thousands of years, long before the invention of the written word, our ancestors sat around fires and transmitted the entirety of their survival knowledge, their culture, and their history through the medium of storytelling. Our brains are literally hardwired to crave narrative structure. When you simply list facts, only the language processing centers of your listener's brain are activated. But when you tell a story, something miraculous happens. The sensory cortex lights up, the emotional centers ignite. The brain of the listener actually begins to synchronize with the brain of the storyteller, a phenomenon known as neural coupling. If you want to persuade a client to adopt a revolutionary new software platform, you do not start by listing the technical specifications and the processing speed. That will only trigger their analytical defenses. Instead, you tell them a story. You paint a vivid picture of a frustrated inventory manager standing in a humid warehouse at midnight, desperately searching for a misplaced shipment while the client demands answers on the phone. You describe the anxiety, the friction, and the looming threat of failure. Then you introduce your software not as a product but as the hero's weapon. You describe how the manager uses the platform to instantly locate the shipment, saving the account, and finally going home to rest. By framing your data within a human struggle and a triumphant resolution, you bypass the listener's skepticism and speak directly to their emotional core. You make them feel the problem, which makes them desperately crave your solution. Once you have mastered the art of holding attention and moving people with your voice and your stories, you cross the threshold into the ultimate realm of human connection: leadership. Leadership is perhaps the most deeply misunderstood concept in the modern world. We confuse it with titles, corner offices, and the authority to command others. But true leadership has absolutely nothing to do with being the boss. Leadership is the profound, selfless ability to empower the people around you. It is the art of making others feel incredibly capable, expanding their belief in their own potential so significantly that they achieve things they never thought possible. Imagine a mid-level manager who takes over a struggling textile manufacturing plant in Surat. For years, the factory floor has been plagued by machinery breakdowns, missed deadlines, and a deeply apathetic workforce. The previous managers had all relied on the traditional authoritarian model of leadership. They instituted stricter penalties, installed surveillance cameras, and barked orders from air-conditioned offices above the noisy looms. And every single time, the workers simply retreated further into resentment, doing exactly the bare minimum required to avoid being fired. The new manager decides to fundamentally rewrite the social contract. During her first week, she does not issue a single directive. Instead, she walks out onto the sweltering factory floor, gathers the senior weavers around a broken loom, and asks a single, revolutionary question. You have been working these machines for 20 years, which means you know them better than any engineer in the world. How would you fix this? In that single moment, she does not diminish her authority. She exponentially multiplies it. By asking for their expertise, she is transferring ownership. She is looking at people who have been treated like mindless cogs for decades and telling them that they are the master craftsmen. The weavers, initially suspicious, slowly begin to offer their insights. They point out a recurring flaw in the threading mechanism that management had always ignored. The manager listens intently, takes notes, and immediately allocates the budget to implement their exact solution. When you give people ownership over a problem, you ignite their intrinsic motivation. People will rarely fight with all their heart for your vision, but they will defend their own creation to the death. The manager in Surat understood that her job was not to have all the answers. Her job was to create an environment where the people who actually possessed the answers felt safe enough and valued enough to share them. Over the next 6 months, the factory completely transforms. The workers begin staying late voluntarily to maintain the machines because they finally feel a sense of pride and territorial ownership over the floor. They are no longer working for a boss. They are working for their own legacy. To empower someone is to deeply understand their matrix and intentionally design opportunities for them to shine. If you are leading a highly creative, low-conscientiousness individual, you do not empower them by assigning them a meticulous data entry project. That is a recipe for mutual frustration. You empower them by handing them a blank canvas, describing the ultimate goal, and giving them the absolute freedom to design a chaotic, brilliant, unconventional path to get there. If you are leading someone whose primary appreciation language is words of affirmation, you do not wait until the annual review to quietly hand them a bonus. You empower them by stopping the weekly team meeting to publicly, specifically praise the extraordinary effort they put into a recent client presentation. Influence and leadership are two sides of the exact same coin. Influence is how you draw people toward you, using the resonance of your voice and the magnetic pull of your stories to capture their hearts. Leadership is how you push that energy back out into them, giving them the tools, the autonomy, and the unshakable confidence to build the future alongside you. It is the conscious decision to stop trying to be the most impressive person in the room and to start being the person who leaves everyone else feeling incredibly powerful. When you commit to speaking so that others truly hear and leading so that others truly grow, you forge relationships that are virtually unbreakable. You stop merely navigating the world and you begin to actively shape it. Chapter 9. Deep Bonds and Impermeable Boundaries. We spend an exhaustive amount of our lives constructing and polishing our armor. We meticulously curate our digital profiles to showcase only our triumphs, our sunlit vacations, and our flawless moments. We walk into professional environments carrying a shield of absolute competence, terrified that if we admit we do not know an answer, we will be exposed as frauds. We believe that to be loved, respected, and valued by the world, we must project an image of unbreakable perfection. But this is one of the most tragic misunderstandings of human connection. Perfection is incredibly intimidating. It is a sterile, glass wall. You can admire perfection from a distance, but you cannot connect with it. True, unbreakable human bonds are not forged in our triumphs. They are forged in the quiet, terrifying moments when we find the courage to reveal our fractures. Imagine a young startup founder in Bengaluru sitting in the polished, minimalist boardroom of a major venture capital firm. For weeks, he has rehearsed his pitch, memorizing every metric, projecting absolute confidence, and painting a flawless picture of his company's trajectory. But halfway through the presentation, a senior partner asks a highly specific, probing question about a recent failure in their supply chain. The founder's instinct, trained by years of corporate armor, is to deflect. He wants to spin the failure into a disguised success, to use corporate jargon to bury the mistake. But he looks around the room, takes a deep breath, and chooses a terrifying alternative. He drops the armor. He admits with total transparency that it was a devastating miscalculation. He explains exactly why his initial assumption was wrong, how much it cost them, and the painful sleepless nights it took to rebuild the logistics from scratch. In that single moment of vulnerability, the temperature of the room fundamentally changes. The investors stop looking at him as a sales pitch and start looking at him as a human being. They see a leader who possesses the ultimate quiet confidence required to own his flaws. By admitting his mistake, he did not project weakness. He projected absolute psychological safety. When we dare to reveal a struggle, an insecurity, or a failure, we send a profound, unspoken signal to the person across from us. We are telling them that they do not have to be perfect around us either. We give them permission to lower their own heavy armor. This is the vulnerability loop, and it is the secret architecture of every deep, lasting relationship you will ever build. You can initiate this loop in your everyday life through the profoundly simple act of asking for genuine help. We often assume that to make a mentor or a colleague like us, we must constantly prove our independence and intelligence. But human psychology operates on a beautifully counterintuitive principle. When you ask someone for their advice, you are not burdening them. You are granting them a profound psychological gift. You are telling them that you deeply value their wisdom. If you are struggling with a complex decision, do not try to project false certainty. Go to a colleague you respect, look them in the eye and say, "I am completely stuck on this problem, and I admire how you navigate these situations. Could you give me your advice?" You will be astounded by how quickly this simple, vulnerable request transforms a casual professional acquaintance into a fiercely loyal ally. However, the decision to reveal your vulnerabilities requires a vital protective counterpart. Opening your heart and lowering your drawbridge is a magnificent way to live, but you cannot leave the castle gates completely unguarded. The very empathy, warmth, and openness that allow you to build deep bonds are exactly the traits that make you a prime target for the dark side of human interaction. This brings us to the absolute necessity of building impermeable boundaries. You must learn how to protect your energy from the people who seek to drain it. We all know these individuals. They are the emotional vampires of our social ecosystems. Think of a family gathering where one specific relative manages to suck the joy out of the room within 5 minutes of arriving. No matter how beautiful the venue, how delicious the food, or how joyous the occasion, they will relentlessly fixate on a perceived slight, a minor inconvenience, or a deeply cynical worldview. Or consider the colleague who constantly corners you by the coffee machine to deliver a toxic whispered monologue of office gossip and chronic complaints. These difficult personalities operate from a place of profound internal deficit, and they survive by siphoning the optimism, time, and emotional bandwidth of the empathetic people around them. The greatest mistake you can make when dealing with a toxic personality is believing that you can fix them. Empathetic people naturally want to heal pain. When the chronic complainer launches into their negative spiral, your instinct is to offer solutions, to show them the bright side, or to logically debate their pessimism. But difficult people do not want solutions. They want an audience. They want a receptacle for their toxicity. When you engage with them, when you try to argue or cheer them up, you are simply feeding the fire. You are rewarding their negative behavior with your precious emotional energy. To protect yourself, you must master the art of emotional distancing and the neutral response. When you are cornered by a toxic individual, you must consciously detach your empathy. Imagine a thick, invisible pane of glass dropping between you and them. You can see their mouth moving, but their negativity simply bounces off the glass. You respond not with eager solutions or defensive arguments, but with absolute, bland neutrality. You offer brief, non-committal phrases. That sounds difficult, I see. By refusing to feed the drama, by withholding the emotional reaction they are desperately seeking, you starve the interaction. Eventually, the emotional vampire will realize that the well is dry and they will move on to find a more reactive source. Equally important is the ability to say a complete, unapologetic no. Difficult people are masters of boundary testing. They will push for one more favor, one more hour of your time, or one more unreasonable concession. We often say yes to these demands out of a misguided desire to keep the peace, silently resenting them as they trample over our time. But true peace cannot be built on a foundation of your own exhaustion. You must realize that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of profound self-respect. When a toxic colleague demands you take on their workload at the last minute, you do not need to offer a frantic, overly apologetic excuse. You simply look them in the eye, keep your voice grounded and calm, and state your reality. I cannot take this on. My schedule is full. Mastering the human experience is a delicate, lifelong dance between these two profound forces. You must cultivate the radical courage to drop your armor, share your flaws, and ask for help, creating the deep, vulnerable bonds that make life truly meaningful. But you must fiercely guard the perimeter of that vulnerability. You are the sole architect of your social environment. You get to decide who earns the right to hear your stories, and who is politely, firmly shown the door. When you balance an open heart with an ironclad boundary, you become emotionally untouchable. You become free. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Engagement. Imagine, one final time, that you are standing outside the heavy wooden doors of a bustling, high-stakes venue. Perhaps it is the most intimidating industry gala of your career, a sprawling social event filled with strangers, or a crucial dinner where the future of your business hangs in the balance. Months ago, this exact scenario would have triggered a familiar cascade of panic. You would have braced yourself for the awkwardness, silently planning your retreat to the darkest corners of the room, preparing to hide behind the glowing screen of your smartphone. You would have felt like a passive passenger in a chaotic, unpredictable social current. But tonight is different. Tonight, you place your hand on the door handle, take a slow, deep breath, and allow your shoulders to drop and roll back. You step across the threshold, and the noise does not wash over you as a wave of anxiety. Instead, The room unfolds before you like a beautifully illuminated map. You are no longer guessing. You are reading the invisible architecture of human connection in real time. You see the starting block near the coat check, thick with nervous, orienting energy, and you purposefully glide right past it. You bypass the crowded, clumsy trap zones of the buffet tables. You navigate seamlessly to the social sweet spot, your hands perfectly visible, your posture expansive and grounded. When you extend your hand for that first greeting, your grip is firm, your eye contact is unwavering, and you flood the interaction with the undeniable biological signal of absolute safety. You have ceased to be a spectator. You have become the architect of your own environment. The ultimate engagement is the profound culmination of everything you have absorbed. It is the beautiful, transcendent moment when these tools cease to be calculated, mechanical steps, and melt into a fluid, natural state of being. You no longer have to consciously remind yourself to hunt for a conversational spark, to read a micro-expression, or to decode a personality matrix. These mechanics merge into a singular, powerful philosophy, the conscious, radical choice to be deeply and relentlessly present with every human being you encounter. Consider how this plays out when you finally engage with the world completely off autopilot. You find yourself speaking to a highly successful, famously intimidating executive at this gala. The old version of you would have relied on a timid, rigid social script, asking what she does for a living and nodding politely at the predictable answer. But the engaged version of you looks her in the eye and asks, "What is the personal passion project that is keeping you up at night?" You watch as the bored, professional glaze vanishes from her eyes. You see the spark. She begins to talk animatedly about a non-profit she is quietly building to help underprivileged youth access technology. You do not just smile and move on. You pull the thread. You ask her why she chose that specific cause. As she answers, you are watching her face with quiet, empathetic focus. You notice a fleeting, fractional micro-expression of sadness cross her features when she mentions how difficult it has been to secure early funding. Because you are truly engaged, you do not ignore that shadow. You do not barrel forward with your own agenda. You lower your voice, lean in slightly, and offer genuine, validating empathy for the immense weight she is carrying. In a matter of minutes, you decode her matrix. You realize she is highly conscientious, driven by the invisible currency of service to others, and whose appreciation language is clearly rooted in words of affirmation. So, you do not offer her a generic compliment about her dress or her company's stock price. You look at her and highlight her exact brilliance. You tell her that her dedication to those children is one of the most profoundly inspiring things you have heard all year. You watch as her shoulders relax, her smile reaches the corners of her eyes, and a deep, unshakable bond is forged. You did not manipulate her. You gave her the rarest and most magnificent gift a human being can receive. You made her feel completely, comprehensively seen. We spend so much of our lives waiting for someone else to find us fascinating. We walk into rooms hoping that someone will finally look past our armor, recognize our hidden talents, speak our native psychological language, and invite us into the light. The ultimate realization of human behavior hacking is understanding that you possess the limitless power to be that person for the rest of the world. When you choose to engage, you break the tragic cycle of social isolation that plagues the modern world. You stop treating the people around you as mere transactions, as stepping stones, or as obstacles. You begin to treat them as magnificent, complex puzzles waiting to be understood, appreciated, and elevated. You recognize that the barista pouring your morning coffee, the nervous intern pitching their first idea, and the intimidating CEO are all operating on the exact same biological and psychological hardware. They are all driven by the same quiet desperation to belong, to be valued, and to be understood. This journey was never truly about learning how to work a room, how to negotiate a higher salary, or how to collect the most business cards. Those are merely the delightful byproducts of a much deeper transformation. This journey is about reclaiming your profound capacity for empathy. It is about possessing the courage to drop your own heavy, exhausting armor so that you can look clearly into the faces of the people around you and read the truths they are afraid to speak aloud. You now hold the master key. You know how to transform small talk into exhilarating exploration. You know how to protect your energy with ironclad boundaries and how to pour your heart into the people who truly matter. You know how to decode the matrix of the human soul. The world is starved for this kind of connection. It is waiting for someone who knows how to ignite the spark, fan the flame, and leave everyone they meet burning a little brighter. The blueprint is yours. The room is waiting. Step forward and captivate.